Hey, g'day, it's Prezzo. Thanks for stopping by. Now, I'm starting a new project today. It's actually a restoration project, and I know there's a million of these out on YouTube, and they usually involve some sort of decrepit looking toy that's been fished out of a canal somewhere and brought back to life. Now, I think a lot of these are actually fake, but the one I'm doing today is absolutely real, and these are two little toys that were given to me when I was a child, and I want to bring them back to their former glory. Now it's going to involve a lot of different processes, so I want to try some soda blasting, I want to try some electroplating and powder coating, but let's have a closer look at the subject of today's video and we'll move on from there. So these are the toys that I want to restore in this series of videos. I think it's going to take more than one video to get all of this done, and these were given to me as presents when I was a kid, so I think I got them for birthday or Christmas presents, and these were made in Japan originally. And they were made by a company, and it's got a brand on this one here. It says SAN. I did a bit of research on it, and they were very, very popular. And it was back in the period when Japanese manufacturing was just starting to get back on its feet after World War II. And these are made of tinplate, so it's a form of very thin sheet steel with a tin coating on the outside. And although tinplate was widely used for food packaging, these days it's been replaced by other metals that are more durable, and as you can see, the corrosion comes through the very thin tin coating on the surface of the steel quite easily. Now these are quite collectible. You can find them on places like eBay and Etsy, and if they're in the original box and they're not dented and scratched and so on, they're worth a fair bit of money. But as you can see, these are well worn, and of course being given these as a child, the first thing you're going to do is to run them off a ramp or try and emulate some sort of car chase that you've seen on TV. And these had a friction drive as well, so they've got a sort of a mechanical flywheel drive in them, so you can sort of give them a push and they'll take off across the floor or the concrete or whatever. And being a kid, what you do is you stage car crashes and so on. So these are quite worn, and there are dents and creases in the sheet metal, which is going to be a bit of a challenge to repair, and also the chrome plated parts are quite corroded. So I want to restore the chrome on these parts, and I want to refinish all of the metal surfaces except maybe for the interior parts, which are still in fairly good condition. So to do all of the cleanup on these, they'll be fully dismantled. I'm going to soda blast the paint off these and the rust, and then I'm going to finish them in powder coat. I've got two new colours. So this one here is going to go on this vehicle. It's a little bit lighter, but it's as close as I could get. And this is a white called traffic white, and that will be used for the police car. And they're not exact matches, and I can't be sure, over this period of time whether these colours are faded or have just gone dull over a period of time, but that's what I've got. I've got a gloss black for the police patrol car, and in order to put all of the stickers back on this police patrol car, I've had new stickers made. So I've replicated all of the artwork from this car. I did that myself, and I sent these off and had them professionally printed. So I'll put those back on the police patrol car when it's done. And I guess it's going to be interesting. I've never done this before, but what I want to do when these are completed is put them in a room in our house that we've decorated in a mid-century modern theme. And I thought, being from the these are early 1960s, I think it's going to work well with the decoration in the room. Now it turns out that both these cars are Fords, and I did some research. I put a call out on Instagram to see if somebody could identify them, and nobody really got anywhere near what they actually are, because they're not one prototype. Now this one here has a badge on the back that says Fairlane, and when I checked 1960s Fairlanes, I got something that was very similar to this, but not exactly the same. And you'll notice that it has a very distinctive backward facing A-pillar supporting the roof, and that's not a feature of this car from the 1960s, but I did find it on a 1959 Ford Galaxy. So I think, and this was suggested to me on Instagram, I think what's happened is the original manufacturer in Japan has taken elements from two different cars and melded those together to avoid having to pay a licensing fee to Ford. So as far as I can tell, this is a 1959 Ford Galaxy, 1960 Ford Fairlane mashup, basically. So that's as close as I can get, but if somebody knows exactly what prototype this is, let me know in the comments. First step in trying to restore these little cars is going to be to dismantle as much of the car as you can, and these are held together with a type of tab and slot joint. And some of the tabs are actually bent back on themselves inside, some are twisted, and you have to be able to look down inside this bottom section of the car to figure out how each one of them is bent so you can release it. So in terms of tools, what I've found useful is a good flashlight so you can look in from either end of the car, various different types of pliers, some long screwdrivers, a dental probe is good, and a pair of medical forceps. Now, it's really hard to show this on camera because when you're doing this you're constantly turning the thing and trying different tools, and it doesn't make very good video. Now I've already done the police cruiser, so let me show you that one and what I found out, and then we'll try and apply it to this one here, but I won't show you everything. So the two main parts of these cars would be this bottom section, which I guess you could call the chassis, and the top section of the bodywork. Now obviously the roof of the car is a separate piece, the bumper bars and the grills and so on are separate pieces. And on this one here you can see the friction drive. Now this is the police car, and it was fitted with a type of sound maker or noise maker which was meant to replicate a siren. So this little thing here is just like a cardboard, like a bent cardboard structure with a long flexible arm attached to it, and the tip of that arm rubs on the pinion in the friction drive. So when you spin that, it makes a sort of a siren-like sound. And I remember using this as a child, and it used to drive my mother insane. And I felt like saying, well, you gave it to me. But with that friction drive there, it's also held onto the bottom of the chassis with three of those little tabs on each side. So I think I'm just going to remove that, and I'll soak it in Evaporust, and I think that's all I'm going to do with that. But I'm really surprised that this little cardboard structure is still intact. But I'll get that off, and you can see how corroded the floor pan of the car is. So all of that's going to have to be stripped, and we've got to get all the rust off before we try to powder coat that. So let me do the other car, and I'll get that in pieces, and I'll show you some of the other bits as we go along. So the first thing I'm going to try to do here is to release one of these little tabs just on this corner of the floor pan, and then I'm going to work my way down trying to get these three off. And there's a couple at the front, and then we should be able to prise up one side of the car. But what you cannot do is just get a screwdriver and start levering on it like that, because you will distort the material, and then it's going to be a nightmare to get it to go back together again. So let me see if I can get this little one off here. So what I've been doing is just using the flashlight, and you can sort of look down inside there and figure out where it is. So I can see it. Okay, so I think that's loose. And it's surprising how well they grip. If you don't get them bent back fully, they don't want to come apart. Okay, so that corner's open. Now I'm going to work my way down and try and get these three done. Okay, these are a lot easier than I thought actually. They just need to be straightened by pulling straight upwards on them. That one's out. Okay, that one's out. I think this one is doubled over on the inside. Yeah, you have to get at that one from the inside. There we go. Okay. Okay, there's the chassis from the blue car, and this one's got a little fan attached to the friction drive, but the flywheel on this one is not working. The pinion is actually worn out, so I'm not sure how I'm going to fix that. Now the wheels just come off, they're just a press fit on the axle, so I get them out. And with this one here, the bonnet, or the, what do the Americans call it? They call it the hood, not sure. So the bonnet opens on this one here, and there's sort of a sheet metal engine inside there. And there's lots of little bits of chrome trim on this one which are going to have to come off, and they're all bent, so it's going to be an absolute nightmare to restore those. But I'll start dismantling this, and then we'll come back and look at all the bits. I've got both these cars fully disassembled now, and it turns out this blue Fairlane has a lot more parts than the police cruiser. So for example, these tail fins are separate items on this car here. So they actually fit on the back, on there. Whereas on the police cruiser, it's actually formed into the sheet metal body. And all these little chrome pieces, some of them are bent, some of them have corrosion, and most of the sheet metal parts that are on the outside of the car have got a lot of corrosion as well. So I'm going to have to deal with getting the paint off and also trying to fix the corrosion as much as possible. Now I went ahead a bit, and I've got one part that I've already removed the paint from. I'll show you that, and then we'll try to demonstrate what I'm doing to get the paint off these parts. Here's a couple of parts that I've already taken off the blue Fairlane. Now this is the bonnet, or the hood if you like to call it that, and I've already stripped the paint off that. Now this is the roof from the same car, and you can see there's a lot of speckly corrosion on that. And when you take the paint off, that corrosion that's underneath the paint there has eaten into the surface of the metal. So on this part here, I don't know if you can see that, but there's like little spiderweb tracks all through that steel. That's where the corrosion has got under the paint and travelled along the surface of the steel, and it's sort of eaten into the surface. Now if I powder coat that now, it'll look okay-ish, but it would be better if we could fill those little depressions that are in the steel. Now I've got a special powder coat that I can use to do that, and you can also see there's minor dents and sort of imperfections in the surface of the material. I've tried to hammer those out as best I could, but with material this thin, it's really hard to work with. So what I'll do now, we'll get this one in the soda bath, we'll clean the paint off, and then we'll have a look at what we end up with, and then we'll go forward from there. This is the material that I've got in the sandblasting unit at the moment, and it's just sodium bicarbonate. It says that there, and it's got the texture of coarse table salt, and it's really good for getting the paint off these steel parts, but it's not really removing the corrosion. Now the reason I'm using soda blasting rather than sandblasting is that this stuff doesn't cut into the surface of the steel and leave a texture on it. It just removes the paint, and that's all. But I'll do this part and I'll take it out and I'll show you what I mean, but there will still be rust on it when it comes out of here. You can see there it does a really good job getting the paint off, and it doesn't really damage the surface of the steel, but at the same time it doesn't get that rust off either. Now if I'd use garnet, that would strip that completely clean, but it would leave a sort of an eggshell finish on the surface of the steel, and given that we're going to put a gloss powder coat on this, would show up underneath the powder coat. So what I've been doing with these parts, I've been putting them in evaporust, and I leave it overnight. That converts all of the corrosion, and although it doesn't actually make it smooth, it's not going to come back. The corrosion won't come back after we powder coat. So I'll drop these parts into the evaporust bucket and I'll leave them. And I'll go and do the rest of the parts now for this blue Fairlane, and then we'll have a look at trying to repair some of the damage in the surface of the steel where it's been dented or wrinkled. You can see the inside's way better. There's the body of the police cruiser after it came out from the soda blasting, and you can see all that corrosion there which really needs to come off. Now the evaporus will do that. It will neutralize it and remove the surface oxide, but there's going to be a lot of imperfections there. Now, speaking of imperfections, that's the next thing. I've got to look at all of these body panels and do the best that I can to actually knock out all of the dents. Now it won't be perfect, but when we do the powder coating we can rectify some of the minor imperfections. So we'll just look at this one and I'll show you how I've been tackling that. This is just an assortment of tools that I've been using to get the worst of the dents out of this material. So I've got a couple of hammers, I've got some punches, I've got a dolly, I've got some sheet metal articles that I've sort of rounded off corners and polished edges and so on. And it's just a case of working through what you've got and trying to find the best tool to do the job. Now in the vise here I've got a piece of this composite decking material. I use this a lot around the workshop and it's nice and resilient and doesn't have any grain. So you can sort of knock sheet metal articles into that surface there and it will deform enough to form a curvature. But it's also fairly rigid, so for flat surfaces it'll also sort of serve as a nice resilient dolly. So we'll look at the back of this little blue Fairlane and we'll see if we can knock out that really bad dent. Now chances are I'm doing this all wrong, but I've got that dolly block underneath the worst of the dent here and I'm just going to use the ball end of this hammer and I'm just going to knock that down. Now what happens of course is you stretch the material, and this is what people who work on sheet metal bodywork for cars do so well. They can predict what's going to happen to the material, where it's going to stretch, where it's going to compress. I'm not that good but we only need to get the form approximate. And the other thing is this material is so thin there's no opportunity to file it flat. On car body work, you know, you're dealing with the thicker sheet metal, and even if you get slight imperfections you can file most of those out or grind them out. I'm not going to be able to do that. So there's still quite a lot of creasing there, so I'm just going to keep at that. This is all exposed later on. This is basically the trunk lid, or the boot lid as we call it. So I'll keep working on that, see if I can get an improvement, and then I'll do all the rest off camera. They're all, you know, different and they require different techniques and so on. I'll just give you an idea of what's involved. Oh, that's not bad. It's got most of the contour correct, but there's obviously a lot of little dents there with high spots. And I'll just keep working at it. There's a bit just there which is going to be problematic. It's right on the bend. When you stop hearing that hollow sound as you're tapping it with a hammer, you know that you now have it flat on the surface of the dolly. I think I'll stop there with that one just for now. It's a good example of one of these little chrome trims that needs repair, and each one's different. You just got to look at it and try to figure out where you need to bend it and how you're going to preserve the contour. And what I've come up with for these ones anyway, because they had that narrow channel, is to put the cross pane of this hammer into that channel and initially just put a bit of hand pressure on it. And then using a second hammer you can sort of get some deformation happening. And back in the day when I was teaching kids, I used to tell them never ever ever hit two hammer faces together, but you can get away with it as long as you don't hit too hard. But you could make up a separate piece of steel, just mild steel, with the correct profile. This will actually get better when we put these tabs through the slots and, you know, sort of lock everything in place. But again, it's just a case of looking at each piece individually, working out where you need to bend it and move the metal and so on. This obviously needs a bit more work. Now the next step is going to be to try and get the chrome off these parts, or at least smooth out the corrosion. So I have put these in the blasting cabinet as well, and you can knock off a fair amount of the loose chrome. We don't have to get it all off, we just want to get a smooth finish, but I'll show you one that I've already done. So here's one I did yesterday. Now this went into the soda blasting unit, and that knocked off all of the corrosion and also any of the loose chrome, and there's sort of a coppery tinge to that. And when this was manufactured, it would have gone into an arsenic copper electroplating tank. That would have put a deposit of copper over the bare steel, and then they would have put the nickel or the chrome over the top of that again. Now here in the home workshop you can't use arsenic copper, but I've got a product called Ultra Strike, which is an acid copper electroplating bath, and whatever they've done to it, they put some sort of additive or chemical that allows it to plate over bare steel. Now once you've got the copper strike on there, you can put a nickel cobalt coating over the top of that, and that will give it that shiny look. Now this isn't going to be perfect. It's really hard to polish this up to a mirror finish, which is normally what you need if you want to get a top quality chrome coating on a part. This is going to have a sort of a shiny-ish finish, but if you look closer you'll see all the defects, but I don't necessarily need this to look brand new. But what I have to do now is get all of the rest of the chrome parts up to this stage, and then we'll have a go at the copper strike later on. Have these parts soaking in the vaporized overnight, and that's removed all of the corrosion, but there is still some underlying damage to the steel. I can also see where there's still some paint attached to these parts, but it actually rubs off fairly easily. So I'm going to scrub these now with Scotch-Brite, and then we'll try putting on the powder coat. We're going to use a primer first, sand that back, and then we can put the top coat on. It's time to have a go at putting some powder coat on these parts. Now I've chosen one that's fairly straight and also one that's pretty terrible, and this had a really bad dent in it and it was badly creased. I've done my best to get that crease out of it, but it's not perfect. It was also cracked and broken on this corner. So what I've done is I've put a piece of copper wire, or brass wire I think, yeah, brass wire on the inside, and I've used a high temperature copper tin solder to make a joint there. Now this solder melts at 220 degrees C. It's going into the oven for powder coating at 200 degrees C, and hopefully that stays intact. But I've chosen this one so you can see what it looks like after I put the primer powder coat on it, and we try and sand that back. So these go next door now to the sink. They get a really good scrubbing with some Ajax and a toothbrush. That removes the traces of the evaporust from the steel. After that, I'm drying these parts with a heat gun just to ensure that there's no water trapped in any of the little corners and creases and so on. Once they're thoroughly dry, we're going to put a primer powder coat on them. So let's go and do that now. This powder that I'm using is called a KL primer. Now, as well as being a primer as an undercoat for another powder, you can also sand this back and you can hide some imperfections in the material. Now, I don't use it a lot, and I think the last time I used it I was a bit disappointed, but we'll give it a go on this. I think the trick is to put it on fairly thick. That gives you some ability to sand it back and get a flat, even surface before we put the colour on. I'm not too worried about the inside. I'll coat that with whatever colour powder I'm going to use on top. Especially on this roof part, I want to put plenty on. I may even have to give it 2 coats. Okay, we'll go and bake that just 10 minutes at 200 degrees C after it goes glossy. I've set that PID controller to 200 and I'm a bit worried about that soldered part on the roof of the car. If that goes over 220, like it's starting to crank up now, that part will just fall off. So we're just going to have to cross our fingers. Oh God, that's hard. I just let the timer run out on these while I had some lunch, so this is pretty much cooled down. So there's the roof part that was so badly dented and creased. And you still see all of that, but we're going to sand it. And these come out pretty good. Thing is though, that filler goes sort of translucent after it's cooked. But I think the idea is just to put a coating on it that you can sand back. Okay, we're going to do them. I'm just using some 400 grit wet and dry on a fairly hard rubber block. And we'll do this wet. Okay, now I did expect that I was going to sand through on some of these high edges, and you see the steel starting to show through there now, but that's actually not bad. I'm surprised actually. There are going to be some visible contours in this, can't get away from that. So I'll keep going with this. It's really just this big square area in the center that I need to focus on. And I should have mentioned that the solder joint held up on the inside there, so I'm really happy about that. And here's a part I did earlier. This is the bonnet off the blue Fairlane. That's all been sanded back and it's looking pretty good now. And there are some minor little blemishes here and there, but when the blue top coat goes on this, you won't see it. It'll look really glossy. So I'm going to get through and do these parts, and I'll do the big parts off camera, and then we'll come back when we're ready to put the coloured powder coat on. I'm just about to wrap up for the day, and I thought I'd give you a situation report. Now, I went ahead and got the KL primer on both bodies, and that went okay, and this has been sanded back now. Now, there are some areas where I've exposed the steel underneath, but I think that's okay. Well, the top coat will cover that. And I also did the satin black on the underbody. Now, that went great. I didn't bother priming these because it's underneath and you're not going to see it. But the satin black went on fantastic, so I'm really happy with them. And then I thought I'll move on and we'll start doing these blue panels. Now, this one looks okay, but it gave me a lot of grief. I could not get the powder to stick on this very narrow edge here, and I tried it 3 times. I put it back in the oven, tried to do it hot, but the problem is you get it out of the oven and by the time you get it wired up and earthed, it's already cooled down. So I managed to get it, but it took quite a few goes. I'm really happy with that one. But these tail fins, again, I could not get the powder to stick right on that very end. So I tried this again 3 times, taking it out of the oven hot, but it cooled down by the time I got it ready. Now, it could also be something to do just with the geometry of the part, the fact that it's got this very narrow end on it. It could be the way I had earthed the parts, but I didn't have a problem with any of the others. Or it could be the powder. Now, I bought a new powder from a company called Static Powders, and I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with it. But if there's an experienced powder coater out there who knows what that problem is, let me know in the comments. I'm all ears. But as it turns out, I think I'm going to be okay. Now, there is a long chrome trim that goes along this edge, and that will hide that little bit that doesn't have the powder on it. And I think the roof covers up the rest, so I think we'll be okay. So tomorrow I'm going to try and get the powder on the body of this one, and I'll do the white on the roof and the white on the body of the police car. And then there's a lot of masking needs to be done on the police car to get the rest of the colour on, which is black. But yep, it's coming along okay, and then we're going to get stuck into the chrome plate. Well, it's the next day, and as you can see, I've got all of the colour on these parts of the car, or both cars, and I started off trying to do the white on these two roof pieces here, and I realised that it was going to fight me all the way. And in the first instance, I tried to do this part just cold, and I put the white powder on and it just fell straight off again. Now I suspect that KL primer is the cause of all my problems, because when I did these floor pans on this steel here, the black went on perfectly, no problem at all. But with the white parts it just went on, but it wouldn't stick. So I ended up doing the two roof parts hot, and I had to do them about 3 times like I did with the blue parts that I did yesterday, but managed to get it. And then I moved on to doing the two bodies. Now I did the blue Fairlane first, and again I put this in the oven and I did it hot and just hung it from underneath the oven tray so I could get it set up quickly and get the powder on while it was still relatively hot. But even then I had to do it about 3 times. And then I got on to doing this police cruiser here, and I changed the setup that I was using. I put a weight on top of the oven tray or the oven rack, and yeah, again didn't go smoothly. I think it's fair to say that I was somewhat vexed by the situation, but I managed to get it all done. Now the police cruiser is going to have to be masked off so I can do the black areas on this car, but the Fairlane, everything is done there now, and this is ready to go back together, except I have to do the chrome parts. Now I've already made a start on that. This is the rear bumper of the police car, and that's had a coat of copper put on it, and I polished that, and that's now ready for the nickel cobalt, which looks like chrome. And I'll do that in the next video because sadly I've run out of time. So I'm going to ask you to come back and watch as we put the black on this car here. We'll do all of the plating on all of the bright parts, and then we get all the cars back together again. And these parts here are for the blue Fairlane, and I'm not going to do anything with these. I'm just going to clean them. They're actually not too bad. There's not a lot of corrosion on them. They're painted on both sides, and this is the interior. And this has got a little bit of rust, but I'll just clean it and dry it, put it back. These are actually made using a lithographic process. So the flat sheet metal would have been printed in an offset printing press, and then it's bent and it's just put inside the car as it is. So in order to replicate that, if I cleaned all that off, that would be way too hard to get that sort of design back on there, especially this one here. So I'm not going to touch that. But given that that's pretty much hidden inside the car, I don't think it's going to be a problem. Okay, so yeah, we're getting there, and I think it's going to be okay when we're done. You can see some of the damage from where I pressed out the dents and so on. This was the corner that had the big massive dent in it, and it's not too bad. When this is on display, I don't think you're going to notice it. Okay, that's enough. Join me next time. I'm going to leave you some wildlife stuff, and I'll catch you on the next episode of restoring these two little beautiful tin cars. Okay, it's Prezzo. I'll sign out for now. Cheers. This is our bleeding heart tree, and it's got the sun behind one of these leaves here, but they end up this beautiful crimson red colour. But the rest of the leaves are a beautiful sort of emerald green. And these are like a rainforest pioneer tree, so if there's a clearing, these will come up very quickly and fill that clearing. This is the female kangaroo that we've had hanging around here for the last 3 or 4 years, and she's got another joey in the pouch. So the juvenile from last year has basically become independent. He's gone, and we noticed a while ago that she was standing up one day and she was licking her belly, and what happens is the fetus has to get from her womb basically into the pouch, and it has to do that completely on its own. So all she can do is stand there and lick the fur to give the tiny little baby a sort of a track to follow, and it gets into the pouch and fuses onto one of the teats. So these females can have a joey in the pouch, they can have one in the womb, and they can have a juvenile that's independent but still hanging around the mother. So they're basically continuously pregnant. And there's a big male that's been here today as well. But you can see that pouch hanging down. So we think that we'll probably start to see the head poking out in the next couple of weeks. This is the big male that we saw here today. We don't see these often. They're way more independent, and they usually only turn up when they want to mate with one of the females. But he's a big boy.